Different person, same disappointment, same ending. Have you ever looked back at your past relationships and wondered why, despite dating completely different people, the outcome always seems strangely familiar? Maybe you keep falling for emotionally unavailable partners. Maybe you're always the one fighting harder for the relationship. Maybe you constantly worry that the other person is pulling away. Or maybe you're the one who slowly builds walls and distances yourself when someone gets too close. And after a while, a difficult question begins to emerge. Why does this keep happening? Why do the same arguments, the same fears, and the same disappointments show up again and again, even when the people are different? Most people assume they're simply choosing the wrong partners. But what if that's not the real reason? What if you're unknowingly repeating the same relationship pattern over and over again? Because the truth is, many of us don't repeat relationships. We repeat patterns. Patterns that often begin long before our first relationship. And until those patterns become visible, they tend to repeat themselves again and again and again. In this video, we'll explore why so many people find themselves stuck in the same relationship cycle and what it takes to finally break free from it. Most people believe the reason their relationships keep failing is simple. They're choosing the wrong people. And at first, that explanation makes sense. After all, every relationship involves a different person, a different personality, a different background, a different life story. So when things go wrong, it's natural to assume that the problem was the person. But what if that's only part of the story? Because when we look closely, something interesting often appears. The people may change, but the pattern stays the same. You don't necessarily keep choosing the same people. You keep finding yourself in the same relationship dynamics. Maybe you constantly find yourself attracted to emotionally unavailable people. Maybe you're always the one chasing while the other person slowly pulls away. Maybe you struggle to trust people, even when they've given you no reason not to. Maybe you need constant reassurance that you're loved. Or maybe you're the one who withdraws whenever someone gets too close. Different relationships, same emotional experience. And one of the clearest signs of a repeating pattern is this. When you look back at several relationships and realize that the ending always feels strangely familiar. The beginning may be different, but the ending feels like you've lived it before. At some point, you have to ask yourself, what are the chances that every single person I've dated was the problem? And what are the chances that there's a deeper pattern connecting all of these experiences? Because if the same story keeps repeating itself with different people, the pattern may not be outside of you. It may be something you're carrying with you into every relationship. And if that's true, where do these patterns come from in the first place? So where do these patterns come from? Why do so many people find themselves repeating the same relationship story over and over again? The answer may have less to do with the people we choose and more to do with what feels familiar to us. Because the human brain doesn't necessarily look for what's healthy, it looks for what's familiar. And that's an important distinction. From a very young age, we begin forming an internal map of what love feels like, what closeness feels like, what relationships are supposed to look like, and what we should expect from the people we care about. These early experiences become the foundation for how we understand connection. The problem is that familiar and healthy are not always the same thing. If you grew up with an emotionally distant parent, someone who struggled to express affection or emotional availability, you may find yourself drawn to partners who create that same feeling of distance. Not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. Your brain recognizes it, it understands it. In a strange way, it feels like home. If love felt unpredictable growing up, if affection, attention, or approval came and went without warning, you may learn to associate love with uncertainty. As an adult, stable relationships can sometimes feel boring, while emotionally intense and unpredictable relationships feel exciting, meaningful, and alive. Not because they're healthier, but because they're familiar. And if you grew up with a controlling or highly critical parent, you may develop the belief that love has to be earned, that your worth depends on proving yourself, that you need to work harder, give more, and sacrifice more in order to be loved. These experiences don't just influence who we're attracted to. They influence how we handle conflict, how much trust we place in others, how we react when someone gets too close, and how we react when someone starts pulling away, which is why two relationships can look completely different on the surface, yet somehow end in exactly the same way. Different person, same pattern. And one of the most common ways psychologists explain these patterns is through something called attachment styles. So if these patterns are shaping our relationships, what exactly are they? One of the most common ways psychologists explain these repeating relationship patterns is through something called attachment styles. In simple terms, your attachment style influences how you connect with other people, how you handle closeness, how you react to distance, how safe you feel in relationships, and how you respond when that sense of safety is threatened. There are several attachment styles, but for this video, we only need to understand three. Some people crave closeness. They want connection, reassurance, emotional intimacy, but at the same time, they fear rejection, abandonment, or losing the people they care about. Psychologists often refer to this as anxious attachment. Others have the opposite struggle. They value independence and personal space, and when relationships become emotionally intense, they may feel overwhelmed and instinctively pull away. Not because they don't care, but because too much closeness can feel uncomfortable. This is often described as avoidant attachment. And then there are people who feel relatively comfortable with both closeness and independence. They don't constantly fear abandonment, and they don't feel the need to run when relationships become emotionally intimate. This is known as secure attachment, but it's important to remember that these aren't rigid categories. They're not labels, and they're certainly not life sentences. Most people will recognize parts of themselves in more than one attachment style, because attachment styles are not identities. They're patterns. Patterns that help explain why we react the way we do when love feels uncertain. And perhaps the most interesting part is this. Certain attachment styles tend to attract each other, which means two people can unknowingly create a relationship dynamic that feels incredibly familiar, even when it's hurting both of them. And one pairing in particular tends to create the exact cycle we've been talking about throughout this video. Let's look at one of the most common relationship dynamics, the anxious-avoidant cycle. And if you've ever found yourself trapped in a relationship that felt confusing, exhausting, or emotionally intense, there's a good chance you've experienced some version of it. What's interesting is that these two attachment styles are often strongly attracted to each other. At first, everything can feel almost perfect. The anxious partner is drawn to the avoidant partner's confidence, independence, and calm nature. The avoidant partner is drawn to the anxious partner's warmth, openness, and emotional depth. For a while, it works. But then the relationship starts becoming more serious. The emotional stakes get higher, and that's when the cycle begins. The anxious partner naturally wants more closeness, more conversations, more connection, more reassurance, more time together. But the avoidant partner starts feeling something very different. Pressure. The relationship begins to feel emotionally overwhelming, as if there's not enough space to breathe, not enough room to remain independent. So they do what feels natural to them. They pull back. They text less. They share less. They become emotionally distant. They start building walls, and the anxious partner notices it immediately. Something feels wrong. The distance feels threatening. The silence feels personal. They begin worrying that they're losing the relationship. So they try harder. They reach out more, ask more questions, seek more reassurance, try even harder to reconnect. But from the avoidant partner's perspective, this feels like even more pressure. So they pull away even further. And without realizing it, both people become trapped in a cycle. The more one person reaches out, the more the other person withdraws. And the more one person withdraws, the harder the other person chases. Until eventually they're no longer reacting to each other. They're reacting to their own fears. One fears abandonment, the other fears losing their freedom, and both are trying to protect themselves. This is why some relationships fall apart even when both people genuinely care about each other. Not because the love wasn't real, but because the patterns operating beneath the relationship were stronger than either person realized. And when those patterns remain unconscious, the same cycle often repeats itself. Different person, same pattern, same ending. So how do you break a pattern like this? For many people, the first instinct is to find a different partner, to believe that the next relationship will finally be different. But if we carry the same unconscious patterns into every relationship, we often end up recreating the same problems with different people. That's why the first step isn't finding someone new. It's understanding yourself, understanding the patterns operating beneath your relationships, the fears you carry, the reactions that happen automatically, the ways you respond to closeness, the ways you respond to distance, and the emotional needs you've been trying to meet for years without even realizing it. Because once you become aware of a pattern, something important changes. You gain a choice. Instead of automatically reacting, you can begin responding differently. Instead of repeating the same cycle, you can start questioning it. Instead of blaming yourself or blaming every partner who enters your life, you can begin understanding what is actually happening beneath the surface. This is also where understanding your attachment style can be incredibly helpful. Not because it gives you a label, but because it gives you a language, a way to understand why you react the way you do, why certain situations trigger anxiety, why intimacy feels overwhelming, why rejection feels unbearable, or why closeness sometimes makes you want to run. Awareness doesn't change everything overnight, but it changes where change begins, because patterns have power when they're invisible. Once you can see them, they start losing that power. And for some people, especially when these patterns run deep, professional support can be an important part of that process. There's no shame in that. In fact, understanding yourself may be one of the most important investments you'll ever make. And perhaps that's the most important thing to remember. If your relationships keep ending the same way, it doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong with you. It may simply mean you're repeating patterns that were learned long ago. And anything that can be learned can also be unlearned. The goal isn't to find a different person. The goal is to stop repeating the same story, because the moment you begin recognizing the pattern is the moment you begin changing it. And sometimes that single moment of awareness is where an entirely different future begins.